Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Grit, Grace, and Growth. I'm your host, Laura Navaquin, and today we are tackling another very common question of whether or not you need a formed LLC or corporation in order to begin investing in real estate. And the answer is no, you do not. There is no law in place that requires that a person has an LLC, which is a limited liability company, in place, or a corporation in order to begin real estate investing. So, woohoo, and what a relief to that. However, is it a good idea to have an LLC or a corporation formed one day? I would say so based on information that has been shed upon me through the years. However, I'm not a financial analyst or a CPA or attorney. So I definitely do recommend that you hire a CPA and an attorney one day to give you custom and specific information dependent on your personal needs and circumstances one day. But let's keep this high level and just share with you more about the difference of what an LLC and a corporation is and how having one or both can benefit you in the long run in your real estate investing journey. So, let's dive into some of the pros and cons and how that would even work. First off, as I shared, an LLC is a limited liability company. This ultimately is put into place for liability, just that, liability. So let's give an example of that. Let's say you are the owner, you're the property owner of 123 Pine Street, and you have tenants that are renting that out. So whether it's short term, long term, really doesn't matter. You have tenants that are in there, and you either neglected or just haven't gotten around to defrosting the driveway on a cold winter day. Say this property's in Ohio, wherever it may be, but the driveway is frosty and iced over. And one of those tenants walks out to the car and slips and gets quite injured. And they take you to court for that injury. The courts may deem you at fault for their injury since you own the property and you have yet taken the measures to de-ice that driveway on this cold winter day. As a result of that, you can be ordered to pay a large sum, 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, who knows, a large sum towards that the insurance policy would not cover. It'd be over the amount that an insurance policy would cover in that scenario. This scenario, if you did not necessarily have an LLC or have that property set up within an LLC, if you owed $10 million, let's give this example and break it down a little further. If you owed $10 million due to the court's judgment and you did not even have $10 million within this LLC or the value of $10 million, they can then go after any other assets you have, your personal home that you live in, any cars, any other stocks and bonds to help cover that amount that you owe that was deemed by the court. However, if you had an LLC that was properly set up and intact, you could be protected from that additional liability. So although even then the court had ordered you to pay out and that were ordering you being liable of $10 million, they are only able to go after the proceeds or the value of that particular LLC. So they wouldn't be able to tap into and touch any other properties that you own that are each of their own LLCs, your personal home and residence, other assets that you may have. So you're protected there, and that's the liability protection and why it would be beneficial to one day have an LLC set up, or actually multiple LLCs set up. The way we have it set up is that each property is in its own LLC, protecting other assets outside of that particular LLC for any particular reason. All right, now let's dive into the corporation and how that would work and how it would benefit you in real estate investing. So a corporation can be set up, even your LLCs could be within your corporation. So that's a whole other setup. I won't go into that in detail again, but a corporation typically is for tax benefits. So yes, having your properties within an LLC, even if you don't have a corporation set up, you still have tax advantages for being the landlord or the owner of that particular property. But there are additional advantages, tax advantages that come with a corporation setup. Also, when this really comes into play and when we have been advised when it's plays a significant part in your investment journey is if your investment strategies consist of flips, even wholesale, so things that are transactional where you're getting paid upfront, where you're not necessarily having certain write-offs or whatever it may be down the road. It can significantly save you in those earnings. So if you're doing a wholesale, for example, and you have your fee is $10,000 for that particular wholesale, you're going to be taxed significantly. But if you're taxing it, being taxed as a corporation, that does save you significantly over what your obligation and taxes would be. So again, just kind of distinguishing the differences between an LLC, which is protecting you for liability, and a corporation, which is giving you tax advantages. Ultimately, I would say both are pretty important to having set up one day, but they're not necessarily vital when you're beginning. Now let's also talk about one of the disadvantages to having an LLC set up from the start. If you are getting a traditional loan, getting a traditional mortgage to cover the funding of a property, having an LLC set up already and trying to get that loan in the name of the LLC, usually banks do not like that and will not do that as you're starting and you don't necessarily have an established portfolio. Two things. One, if you had an LLC set up already or you set it up after the fact, two ways you can get that property moved into the LLC. One, you would actually have to, so you would have that mortgage set up in your own personal name. You would have to reach back out to them and basically request that they release that mortgage and allow you to put the LLC on it. So that's one method. Doesn't necessarily always work because then usually the remainder of the balance is owed for that mortgage unless they give you an exception. But that is one method and it does work. It's not always the easiest method. Or already having an established portfolio where a bank would take that into consideration for placing the new mortgage or that new loan in the LLC's name. So just giving you that information as well. Nonetheless, you should always check with your legal advisors for advice on whether you need an LLC or a corporation. One of the most common questions we get is whether to choose an LLC over a corporation. We have both. We also have the trust. It really depends on your personal circumstances. And again, I'm not the legal advisor here. Refer to your legal advisor, trust on them to set you up in the most advantageous way for your personal needs. But ultimately, people do not refuse to get started on your real estate journey because you're holding out or waiting to get a LLC or a corporation formed. If you feel like you need one, go ahead. Talk to your tax advisor and get one set up. It really does not take very long to set up. I also, work very closely with Busy, who takes you from setting up an LLC or a corporation. And I'll have another course or another episode on that later on that goes into detail on that and the advantages of using a company like that to get your LLC and or corporation set up, because they take you from A to Z. Also can act as your registered agent for you, and I'll explain what that is in a later episode. But if you are setting up an LLC or corporation, definitely look for my code and utilizing Busy, because they make it very easy and streamline the entire process, and it's very affordable, plus your state filing fees depending on where you're filing. Again, in a later episode, I'll talk about some of the advantages of filing in certain states, falling back into privacy reasons and tax advantages. But that's really it for today's episode of Great Grace and Growth. Again, thanks for tuning in. If you found this episode helpful as to whether you need an LLC or corporation to get started, don't let it hold you back. Begin your journey and go